Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. Got a good show for you here on this Thursday. You know, we talk a lot about UFOs and UAPs and a lot about soft disclosure and the disclosure movement. One of the things we haven't talked about and really haven't gotten down to the heart of is what happens with alien abduction and what happens on the other side of this issue. What happens with the people involved in aliens, and are they so friendly? You know, we debate this issue quite a bit as to whether, you know, we have two sides of this camp. We have the people who say that aliens are coming here to save this planet, to save us from ourselves, to take the nuclear weapons away from us, to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot, however you want to put it. And then we have people that say, you know, there's nothing good about this experience. I've looked these creatures in the eye. I've had horrible experiments done to me. There's nothing good about any of this. Our guest today is Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. And Lesley is a Toronto-based certified clinical hypnotherapist who specializes in a number of modalities, including working with individuals who feel that they've had experiences with extraterrestrial beings. Most of this fascinating work, as well as metaphysical therapy, such as past life and interlife regression, we'll talk about that as well, takes place at Lesley's Toronto hypnosis clinic, Lightwork Hypnosis. Prior to her work in hypnotherapy, Lesley has also had a busy career as an actor, dancer, and vocalist. And for the past 20 plus years, she has also been a top jazz and arts media consultant with an array of Grammy and Juno winning clients, as well as major jazz festivals, which we were talking a little off air about our love of jazz and jazz in general, and record labels. Lesley is currently the director of LMC Media, and with offices both in Toronto and Lesley's hometown of New York City. She's also a busy arts writer, contributing regularly to a variety of publications. Let's welcome into Darkness Radio, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. Lesley, welcome in to Darkness Radio.
Oh, Tim, thank you so much, and thank you for asking me to join you today. I've always been a huge fan of the show, and I'm so pleased to be chatting with you. I'm pleased to be talking about Minneapolis, where I went to university, where my mother is from. And
yeah, hey, you know, sure, yeah.
Ja, yes, g'day. Anyways, so I know how to say in Swedish.
Oh, well, that's more than I know. Hey, you're talking to a French guy. Well, French, Eastern European. You know, I had no clue. So,
well, Swedish will never be the national diplomatic language. Let's put it that way. It's diplomatic people, but it's a very difficult language, and I'd rather speak French myself. So that's why I'm here in Canada. Maybe Swedish should be the international language. It tends to be. It should be. Yeah. Tends to be a more neutral country. They're completely neutral. You know, I think most Swedes, including all my cousins, they speak English so fluently that it's effortless for them. That's a sort of a standard thing in the Netherlands, and I'm not only the Netherlands, but in Scandinavia, for everybody to speak English. So there you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
There you go.
Anyway, I'm so pleased to be here and pleased to be chatting with you. And boy, there's a lot of area to cover here because I was fascinated by your intro, and let's get into it.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you here, Lesley. And, you know, I want to start maybe with your beginnings. You mentioned college and the University of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Let's just briefly get into the beginnings of interests. And let's start with, I want to start with the beginning with hypnotherapy. I know you were in the arts for a long time, but I find people who find the mind fascinating are fascinating. And the reason I say that is because it takes a certain person to want to know how people tick.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. Oh. It's a lot of curiosity. You have to be a naturally curious person. And it's very helpful to have a good memory about people and be able to remember details so you can make them feel comfortable every time you meet them. But yeah, curiosity is essential. Well, I got to tell you, Tim, that my work in mental health care goes way back to high school when I used to volunteer at the local state mental hospital. Seriously. And so I have always been fascinated with both the medical and the psychiatric, if you will. And later on, when I was putting myself through school, and I went to both the University of South Dakota and the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. So I worked as a psychiatric aide at the Yankton State Hospital, which I hope doesn't exist anymore. I don't know. It was quite draconian. But at any rate, I was a psychiatric aide there. I worked all night on the graveyard shift, and I was studying theater, and many of us in the theater department had that job, those of us that couldn't qualify for loans or what have you. And that experience, which was 3 years, that experience changed me in so many ways. It changed me as far as my feeling about what mental illness is. It changed my feeling about, the ideas of environment versus genetics. I mean, all kinds of things, all kinds of wrong ideas that I had been taught, were blown out of the water just by observing and interacting with these dear souls who were so tortured. And we didn't really have any medications then. It's amazing. I'm talking about the very early 70s. Psychotropic drugs were in their infancy. We didn't even have antidepressant medication. What we did have was Thorazine. So people were whacked out of their brains, but we no longer had to use the padded rooms and the straitjacket. See, this is how recent what we would consider like Victorian mental health care was still operating in full flower. How recently, with the advent of medications, we were able to move ahead in a sense. But anyway, that was my first interest. Now, I did have a quite astonishing encounter experience of my own when I was a young actor working in Summerstock in the Black Hills of South Dakota, where they have the Rushmore heads.
Yep.
So my interest in ufology was already somehow active before that.
Okay.
And it was around this time that also Eric von Daniken came out with his Ancient Aliens film, which was like a Super 8 film. And I remember, we all jumped into somebody's car and hid in the trunk so we could go to the drive-in to watch it. There's drive-in material. Eric von Daniken's Ancient Aliens. It must have been on a double bill with an earthquake or something. But anyway, in my own life, I guess I passed through really kind of what you would call a midlife crisis. Now, I didn't buy a red sports car and get a mistress or a mister or whatever. I didn't do that. But I felt that what I was doing as far as being a publicist was completely irrelevant. It didn't help anybody. I felt that I could blow somebody's ego up for 3 months when they paid me, and I wasn't solving any of their problems or helping them in any kind of real way. And so I knew I wanted to do something that would be therapeutic, that would help other people. And my husband, God bless him, and I'm not sure why he really did this. Maybe he was being influenced in some way by a spirit guide or something, but he knew I was in this confusion. So he bought me a past life regression with a noted hypnotherapist, not who I eventually studied with, but a noted hypnotherapist. Now, that experience was enlightening on all kinds of levels, but the main thing that I took away from it was a knowledge that I could do that work, that I had found the thing. Hypnotherapy is over 6,000 years old, and if you accept the idea of antediluvian civilizations, it's even older than that. So I believe that it was something that I have done in other lifetimes. I instantly understood the process. I feel I had a good voice for the work and a feeling and an empathy. And from there, it wasn't very long before I took the basic hypnosis course, which allows you to practice. And then as time went on, I took various accreditations, primarily in metaphysical hypnosis, past life regression, interlife regression. And what started to happen is I was working in a very nice kind of upscale hypnosis clinic, lots of well-heeled clients and such.
Mm-hmm.
And about once a month, someone would call in and say, I don't know who to talk to about this. I have marks on my body. I'm not sleeping. I have a missing time. I woke up in my car and my shirt was on backwards. Whatever it was, this was and none of the other practitioners wanted anything to do with it. Oh no, that person is crazy. Well, I knew from my own experience years before that these were probably not mentally ill people, or at least not most of them. So I began working with the experiencers that came into this clinic. And what I did is, now I don't want anybody to think that I reinvented the wheel here. What I did is I adapted past life regression techniques taught to me by my mentor, Dr. Georgina Cannon. No relation to Dolores Cannon, but Dr. Georgina Cannon is from the UK and lives in Canada. And she is the wonderful, amazing woman. She's authored many, many books on this subject. And she was also a direct student of Michael Newton, who was one of our foremost pioneers in contemporary hypnotherapy. So I began working with these individuals. And it wasn't long before I was out on my own, and I was just being contacted. Improper word. People were reaching out to me. And this was again, before we had really reliable ways to work with people internationally or globally, such as Zoom. We had Skype, but it was completely problematic. And, the Skype calls would drop. So I was kind of limited by the amount of people that I could see in person. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You didn't really have, in the beginning when I started like 20 years ago, we really didn't have effective tools. So I saw a lot of people in person. Now, one of the things that I feel transformed my work is I became a member of, or a participant rather, in MUFON's Experiencer Research Project that was run by Kathleen Martin, noted expert and the niece of Betty Hill, of Barney and Betty Hill.
Right. So
by being part of that research program, anyone that was, close enough, and some people flew in, if they had made a report to MUFON and MUFON wanted further information, I would often be called in to work with these individuals.
Now, Lesley, let me walk it back a little bit. So tell me about the first call you get where it's unusual, where you think that maybe there's something here that, pardon me, had to cough there. Tell me about the first call you get where it seems a little unusual, where this isn't someone who's not all there, but maybe it's something that could be out of this realm or some unusual circumstances, whether it be an implant or whether it be somebody who's lost time. And you say, I'm going to jump to this and figure out what this is. I know it might be something otherworldly, or it might be something not quite of this person's control. We'll put it that way. How do you start to connect the dots and know that you've got to do this modified past life regression?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And so when I was first working in this area, as I mentioned, the clinic I was working at, it's incorrect English, the clinic where I was working, I didn't do the intake. Okay. So they would just say, well, you see this person who thinks that they've had an experience. And I would say, okay, send them in, And at that point, as I was doing a detailed, as I was having a detailed conversation with this individual, I would have a pretty good idea, right away, whether we were dealing with some type of mental health issue.
Okay.
And I'm not sure about the law in Minnesota, but I'm no longer a licensed psychiatric technician. So as a hypnotherapist, I am not allowed by law to work with individuals who have been diagnosed with a mental illness. And by that, we don't mean depression, anxiety. What we mean is, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And I can still work with individuals like that if I have permission from the attending psychiatrist. But the point is that, yes, a certain percentage of people are going to be delusional, or they're having, psychotic episodes, some percentage. But honestly, after an intake where you talk to someone for about an hour, maybe, and I get them to talk about their child, and the people that were coming to me, 99% of the time were stable, mentally healthy individuals who were highly functional in their lives. In other words, people like attorneys, judges, accountants, you name it, teachers, you name it. A lot of the people that I have worked with come from highly functional lives and have managed somehow to compartmentalize their experiences or their strangeness or the strange things that have happened to them or that they've observed so they can move ahead in their lives. And so there are also a percentage of people who are completely dysfunctional, who may not be mentally ill, but they can't get their lives together. So we see that too, people on assistance and people who, this is a phenomena that cuts across all levels, all socioeconomic, all racial, all global ethnicities. All of this stuff is just completely cut right down the middle. I have seen people from every kind of walk of life that you can think of. But the main thing is that they must be mentally healthy. They can't have a psychiatric history where they have been hospitalized. And I have a way of getting people to tell me things. But if I'm strongly suspicious, I will always err on my instinct.
Okay.
I've seen severe mental illness close up and personal, and I don't think very many people could fool me.
Let me ask you this, Lesley. And this is going to seem kind of naive on my part, and I apologize for this. Does someone with schizophrenia or someone who's bipolar necessarily not exhibit putting together a quote unquote together life like an attorney or a judge or a doctor or someone that has
there can be. Yes, there are people who, I think what you mean, there are people, we call them test proof. There are schizophrenics and psychotics who can, for a time, seem to be completely normal, healthy human beings. I mean, look at Ted Bundy, for instance. And he was what you would say highly functional in his life. Always worked and had this other aspect. So yes, there are complex I don't mean to ever speak in generalizations, because there are always exceptions to the rule, but absolutely there can be people that would present, a healthy, what have you, successful life. And yet they have extreme mental health issues.
You're saying to rule out anything being a delusion as opposed to reality. You're excluding schizophrenics, bipolars. I shouldn't say bipolars, but people with bipolar issues. You're excluding them from hypnotherapy. Is that what?
Well, what I have to say is, again, I wouldn't necessarily exclude people who are bipolar from hypnotherapy. Okay. But for me, in Canada, it is against the law.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, it is a guideline that I need to follow, to just, maintain my insurance and everything else that's necessary with the practice. But the thing is, they would have to have been diagnosed as such.
All right.
In other words, I could see someone and I think, wow, maybe there's some kind of manic depressive thing going on here, but it's not very, I don't feel it's a very strong part of this. And this person hasn't been diagnosed and they're not on any medications. They could just have mood swings. So and that's where my instinct comes in. So if someone hasn't been diagnosed with a mental health disorder and yet, I feel that there may be something going on there, I have to evaluate, does this impinge on their memory? Do they confabulate? Do they have hallucinations? So again, that's why it takes me a while to decide how to proceed, because I want to help everyone. But if there's a good chance that what these dear souls are coming to me with is more hallucination than reality, I have to be able to determine that. And
I hope you understand why I'm kind of belaboring the point a little bit, because we do get a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of, but there are a fair amount of reported sightings and a fair amount of reported experiences that are reported where people are called into question. And the first thing that is torn down at the root of these reports is a person's background.
Indeed. And certainly, people are vulnerable who come forward. That's one of the reasons they don't like to do it.
Right.
Nobody wants to have it pointed out that you took some acid at the University of South Dakota a few times. I wouldn't like that to come up. Yes, I've experienced hallucinations. Yes, but under unusual circumstances. So, I come at things with a perhaps I should say, I come to the person as a sounding board in a non-judgmental way. And if I just listen, they will tell me everything. Sometimes one of the things that is consistently a tough deal is if someone has had a traumatic childhood with child abuse or abandonment, or sometimes a childhood is so traumatic and terrible that mentally healthy individuals will suppress it because it is so painful. So anybody that is suppressing something like that, like an abuse or a trauma, it's really tough to do regressions with them.
I bet.
Because they have stopping blocks, or they won't see anything. I mean, that is one of the things that has consistently been challenging for me is getting around someone's trauma in this physical life. And sometimes that stuff is buried and so suppressed that it's impossible to get beyond the birth experience, or impossible to get to memories that may be surrounding those periods of time. It's like a big shutdown. And now, however, that being said, is that most experiencers have some memory suppression. They may have partial memories. The memories may be confused, but that is kind of that's a different thing. And what I find, Tim, is that many experiencers begin to have an awful lot of recall around midlife. My personal feeling about this is there is no such memory block that can last indefinitely. I don't accept that idea, and I don't believe it, unless there's organic damage to the hard drive, to the brain itself. But I think that many memory blocks, especially those that have been created by our combined ET-US space program, which exists, they were only designed to last for 20 years. They used them on those poor souls, in the Super Soldier Project, the 20 and back. So whether a memory suppression of ET contact has been suppressed by an extraterrestrial being for a benevolent purpose, perhaps, so that the person doesn't get confused in their life or what have you, or whether it's been suppressed for a goal type thing, as in the SSP. I have not come across any memory blocks of that type that have been imposed that we can't get around.
Lesley, you can't just throw a bunch of terms out and not explain them. Hold on a second here. So
Okay.
I've got to throw one thing at you, and then you have to double back from my audience that doesn't know what you were just talking about there. So here's what I have to, here's the one question I have, and then I'm going to have you go back and explain something. The one question I have is, you almost threw out an insinuation that there might be a tie between people who have had personal trauma, let's say abuse in abusive situations between parents and children, and people having had abduction experiences with aliens. Is that true?
Well, it has to be, it has to be unwound, because we are very clever and creative people, and sometimes suppressed abuse can seem to manifest as some type of incident of high strangeness over which the abuser is not identified. That's what it's about. It's the abuse and not wanting to see that it's your mother or your father or whatever, right? Or Uncle Dud or Grandpa Joe, right? That's what it's about. So it does happen that people repress memories of actual physical abuse in this life, nothing metaphysical about it, that will be reconfigured, if you will, as false memories and of an ET abuse or an ET probe or whatever that does happen. I myself have not encountered that, Tim, not in all these years of doing that. The only thing that I can really honestly tell you about working with individuals who have had abusive childhoods is it's just very hard to make them feel safe enough to allow themselves to look at their own memories. They've spent many years trying not to think about something.
Well,
and yeah,
I think it's hard to look at those memories without feeling the pain. That's the thing.
Well, that's it. It's self-preservation. We all do it.
Yeah.
We all, and I tell you, just as an example, my late grandfather abused both my brother and myself sexually when we were children. And my mother, although she doesn't remember it, she has it suppressed. Okay. My mother's done that all of her life, suppressed it and acted in bizarre ways.
Right.
That's her.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until my brother had some alcohol and drug problems and was going through AA, and he started to have flashbacks of the memories coming back to him. And when he told me about it, without knowing if I'd experienced the same thing, I began to have flashbacks. And then I ultimately went to a psychiatrist and got some professional help and worked through the experiences. But I had pushed the whole thing down, I had put, and this was years before I worked in hypnosis. I would imagine if someone had tried to hypnotize me, it would have been very difficult to do so as far as a regression process, because of everything in the memory engrams that I was holding down.
Right, because it was farmed out of you. You weren't ready to deal with it. In fact, you could almost say your brother farmed it out of you. That's why you were having the flashbacks. And I'm
not sure my brother ever suppressed the memories in the way that I did, because his compensation was drugs and alcohol, so he couldn't remember.
Yeah,
I think he always had the conscious memories. He just was afraid to speak to me about it. When he finally did, when he was sober, I said, first I was in denial, but then I remembered certain things that corroborated so strongly with what he told me. And then I had just had flashes, like when PTSD is happening, flashes of the horrible stuff. And so this is the kind of thing that can happen when people have traumatic experiences with some some species of extraterrestrials, either as children or beyond that. That same kind of thing can happen where they are suppressing those traumatic memories. And I guess the distinguishing thing about experiencers is that by the time they come to me, they want to remember. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so they've had the flashbacks. They know something's gone on. They just want to clarify what it is.
Yeah, and they can't sleep. They have this insomnia is a huge part of the experiencer issue. They're afraid to sleep because they're afraid they'll be taken. You know, the sleep thing is always terrible. So you've got sleep deprived people who are doubting their own sanity. And, you know, very often when people have come to me, especially in middle age, where they're starting to remember things after they have come to me, and we get back there and in their own words, they describe in detail things that have happened. When they come out and they remember everything, they just sob because they thought they were insane. They thought they were mentally ill. And it is such a relieving thing when these memories first begin to come out. And when they're finally looked at, they're not always as traumatic or horrible as this person has speculated from what they're remembering. And also, Tim, it's important to know that all fear, all phobias, begin in the subconscious mind and are usually protective mechanisms.
Yeah.
And so, and a lot of phobias, especially those that come from our childhood years, are based on false information. And that's part of how we treat phobias in hypnotherapy is, distinguishing, finding where that phobia began and then disrupting it.
Right. Okay. So before we go to break, you need to explain to our audience, because there may be some that are unfamiliar with it, what the Band of 20 is in the Super Soldier program, because you can't just, I mean, those of us that read comic books are assuming that you're talking about Captain America, but you need to explain to us a little bit about what that is. You just can't throw that out, Lesley, and have our audience expect to know what that is.
All right. Well, now this is an area that is not totally agreed upon by ufologists. There are some staunch ufologists that don't accept this. Mm-hmm. However, what I can tell you is I am now working with a number of individuals who have been through what we call either the Black Ops operations, the secret space program. It's called the 20 and back, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But it appears from the evidence, the anecdotal evidence and other evidences, it appears that there is, in fact, a collaborative secret space program that involves most of the nations in the world and is being run in conjunction with various groups of ETs, not all, I believe, who have a wonderful sunny agenda. You know, I think as above, so below. I think that there are such a wide variety of ETs with wide agendas, and the ones working with the United States, I believe, are the Zeta Reticulites, the Zeta Reticulite Greys, who first came on the radar to the U.S. government at the time of the Roswell crash. And from, ufology, history, what is believed that happened is there was not one crash, but there were three. And the ETs from Zeta Reticulite were brought down with some type of anti-grav particle thing that we had at the time. And there were survivors of that craft. And these beings were from Zeta Reticulite, the same beings that kidnapped Betty and Barney Hill. And this is during the Truman administration. So this whole thing I'm about to tell you is often called the Truman Agreement.
Okay.
So apparently what occurred is after this Roswell crash, and we had survivors, we had everything and going, the Zeta Reticulites made a deal with the then government of Harry S. Truman and explained that they were having terrible problems with reproduction. They could no longer reproduce. Could they, in fact, have some of our healthy DNA to try to get that going again? And in exchange, the United States would be given advanced technology that they could sort of handle. So that agreement went down. And the ETs assured President Truman that they were only going to take the tiniest little amount of people that they could to research this massive DNA project. Well, that, of course, was not true. Many individuals were taken, particularly after World War II, up into the 80s.
Okay.
And, sperm was taken from men, ova was taken from women. Women were used gestationally. They inserted and they took out fetuses or feti, I guess. So it was all of this stuff was going on. Now, in exchange, we got fiber optics, integrated circuits, Velcro.
Velcro. That's all we got. Velcro and some circuits?
Velcro. And so these various things were being parceled out to different leaders in the industrial process. I mean, IBM got some stuff, the same people, International Business Machines, the same people who built the gas chambers in Germany, IBM, they got a chunk. The Skunk Works. It was meted out like that. Now, the gentleman that was on the scene for all of this, and he's now passed away, bless his heart, was Colonel Philip Corso.
Okay.
And he was made into what they called the Department of Foreign Technology. So it's very possible that the people even working on reverse engineering a lot of this stuff thought it was Russian. This is the beginning of the Cold War. So it's very improbable that most of these people knew they were dealing with anything that was extraterrestrial, for sure. And there is, if any of your listeners are particularly interested in this time period with all the details and stuff that I can't provide here, there's a wonderful book called The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip Corso, and that will answer all of your questions about how this secret space program began. It began with that agreement, that incident, and from that time, all kinds of money and funds has been siphoned into the SSP. There are literally billions and trillions, maybe even, of dollars that are missing from the treasury of the U.S. government. And this went into all kinds of various programs involving various ETs. And I said, some of them benevolent, some of them not. I do believe and this is after what I've heard, I'm just telling you the stuff I've heard.
Okay.
Right. So, but I do believe that there is a benevolent sort of Gene Roddenberry-esque United Federation of Planets. I've just heard about it too many times from too many diverse experiencers to doubt it. And so there are really evolved, wonderful beings that we do enact with. So people are right in a certain amount of cases. You've got the tall Nordics, the people who look just like us, the Pleiadians, the Lyrans. We're genetically connected very strongly to all of these bipedal beings, and they look at us as like cousins. They seem to feel some sense of responsibility for our development, and yet, just like in Star Trek, they have a kind of a hands-off thing. And, the message that the contactees that I work with are getting is, you guys have to clean up your own backyard. You have to evolve and stop hating each other and killing each other and carrying on with all of this barbaric bullshit. We're not fit yet to become members of an anti-war, sophisticated, benevolent enclave. to use a good Catholic word. But, that's the message I'm getting. We are supposed to be the stewards of the environment and the stewards of the animal life. And I think we've probably frustrated the heck out of our progenitors because, many of the primary characteristics of human beings, of Homo sapiens sapiens, includes greed and avarice and competition and, and like that. So we're fighting against our own nature in a lot of ways. And Tim, look at the diversity of development, of human development on this planet. We have on one end, I'll just name, the Dalai Lama, Pope, Martin Luther King, you put in whoever you want there. And on the low end, we got Adolf Hitler and Charles Manson and David Koresh and God knows who else. So look at that sliding scale. Apparently, that is why our planet is often referred to as the grand experiment, because apparently having diverse development in the way that we do is apparently in our corner of the galaxy quite unusual.
But in defense of Earth, they need us to clean our act up, but they're coming down and anal probing us and taking out our cattle.
That first of all, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about as far as a negative experience is stuff that has been sanctioned and is part of the secret space program because they're always researching shit.
Yeah, I hear
all the time. So at this point, I should probably add, eventually the Truman Agreement timed out and the Zeta Reticulites honored that. So if I work with younger people, which is not always so common, but if I work with younger people who didn't live through the, the 70s or whatever, I am not finding anything to resemble those type of negative experiences. Now, they may have experiences with greys or insectoids or reptilians, but they're not having this horrible kind of thing that you're talking about. That was unique to that program and that time, and it has now timed out. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying it doesn't happen now.
Okay. Let's do this. We're going to take our break, and I'm going to throw something incredibly ironic out before we go to break. As we're talking about aliens, I want to tell everybody, first of all, our guest today is Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. We are talking about clinical hypnotherapy, and we're also talking about people who have had experiences with aliens and their we're going to talk in the second half of the program about what kind of experiences they've had with aliens, and we'll get into that with our guest, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, here in the second part of our program. But first, let's talk a little bit about the UFO Disclosure Symposium, which is coming up, and here's the ironic part, Lesley.
Yeah.
May 27th through the 29th, Darkness Radio is proud to present that Disclosure Symposium coming up in Vernal, Utah. You can get your tickets online in the link in the bottom of this program, in the description in the bottom of this program. Just click on that link and you can get 3 different ticket packages. Among the attendees and guests to that symposium include Dr. Travis Taylor, who is, I don't know if you guys saw it not last night, but the night before, third season now of The Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch is on now. On History Channel, but the season premiere was on the other night. Good program, by the way. But he will be at this symposium. Dr. Michael Boyd, Professor Avi Leb will be there. L.A. Marzulli, among others. Micah Hanks will be there as well, good friend of the show. Folks, there are going to be 4 different videos that will be revealed to the public that have never been seen before, of 4 different UAPs in this symposium. Also, some other things that you can participate as well. If you pick up the VIP admission ticket, you also get a tour of the Blind Frog Ranch out there in Vernal, Utah. Has had a lot of the same activity as the Skinwalker Ranch, so that's available to you. The general admission ticket is there, as well as a daily admission ticket and a live stream admission ticket. So if you can't get out to Vernal, Utah, you can stream the entire conference from your home. That's right. You can check out the entire conference from your home. Just click on the link in the description of this program. Check it out. It costs nothing to look at the website and check out the UFO Disclosure Symposium. That's Memorial Day weekend, May 27th through the 29th in Vernal, Utah. Check it out and let us know what you think. And see if you want to check out that UFO Disclosure Symposium at the end of the month. I'll tell you this much. I'm going to be intrigued and engaged in checking it out because it is going to be a newsworthy symposium that weekend. They're going to be breaking some news over there in Vernal, Utah. When we come back, we'll check out more with our guest, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens under hypnosis with these alien abductees, for lack of a better term. And we're going to see exactly how scary it is and what exactly their intentions are with us when we come back here on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. Our guest is Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. She's a Toronto-based certified clinical hypnotherapist. And we are talking about people who have been abducted by aliens and their hypno-regressive work. We're also getting into some past lives here at the bottom of the hour here and talk a little bit about some past lives as well. Lesley, let's jump into it a little bit here about what exactly some of these messages are that you're getting from abductees, and a little bit about what an abductee goes through when they sit in the chair across from you and go under hypnosis.
Okay.
So you get an experiencer who comes into your office, and let's say they're sitting in front of you, and they say to you, "Well, Doc, here's the deal. I think I've had an encounter with a being." How exactly does the regression start? How do you take them back into that experience? What do you do?
Well, first of all, obviously, we mentioned before, we've already had a very long, detailed talk. So generally, by the time they come to see me, I have an idea of maybe a few different partially recalled memories that they've told me, or some repetitive experiences from childhood. I have a pretty good idea about where to start, right? So the thing to remember about hypnosis is it's really pleasurable. This is not a scary experience or a stressful experience. In fact, it's the opposite. So to do regression work of any type, we really need to get people into a fairly deep trance. Now, say, for instance, if I'm working on someone who wants to quit smoking or bites their nails or what have you, it's really only necessary that I get them into the alpha state. And we're partially in the alpha state all the time. So for suggestions to work in that kind of, for behavioral modification, you don't have to get people very, very deep. And so a complete appointment is usually about an hour. Something like that. Now, for any kind of regression, I like to get people into the theta state, which is below sleep. So it's a kind of a place of accessing, I feel, like the universal consciousness. Now, that's just my own idea of that. People may have other ideas, but certainly the theta state is the deepest state that we can bring someone to and still be able to converse with them. There is a state below the theta state. We call it hypnotic coma, or the Esdale state. And I would only use that if I was in hospital and was conking somebody, if somebody was having a spinal tap and they can't take lidocaine or something, so but we don't use that practically in everyday hypnosis. So we get them into deep trance, and I do that just by talking to people. Usually I start with relaxation. You might call it progressive relaxation. And I spend a good deal of time relaxing their bodies from the top of their head down to the tips of their toes. And now I'm also looking for physiological signals that tell me the depth of the trance that the person is entering. And if I'm working in person, there are also some physical things that I can do. I check to see if the muscles are disconnected by moving the wrist, or there are a few other things that I do if I'm actually working with someone one-to-one. But when I feel that person is in the right zone, then I start moving them around in their life. Now, this is really just kind of it's kind of like lubing things up so that they will work when we go other places. But, and I move people around to positive, happy memories. And that way, everything stays good. There's no trauma that's recalled, generally, even if it's minor trauma. So I have people move around in their lives. And then when I feel that the memory mechanism has been, I should say, fully released, in a sense, that's kind of how I think about it, then I gently guide the person to probably the earliest partial memory that they have.
Okay.
And often that's in childhood, because I got to tell you, Tim, I don't believe that there is any such thing as someone who's had one ET encounter. I think that most of these people, 99.999, have been experiencers for their entire lives.
Now, let me stop you for a minute, Lesley. And this is going to seem like kind of a weird question, but for some reason I have to ask it. Is it because you're going to think this is weird?
Carry on. I'm going to think it's weird.
Well, and I'll tell you why. Because
wide envelope.
as a kid, I remember as a second and third grader being fascinated by astronomy and being fascinated with the stars, and planets and just seeing, going to the Science Museum of Minnesota and they've got the huge displays and whatnot of all that, and being fascinated by all of that. And then eventually, and that was during the time too of the major space shuttle launches. So, you were really into the NASA programs. And I think to myself, is that a matter of us maybe even telepathically calling out to the universe and bringing these things in? I don't want to say asking for it, because that's not the language I want to use, but are we summoning these creatures, these aliens, to us and making ourselves targets to be experimented on, or are they randomly choosing these people to experiment on?
Well, I don't think we have ever been alone, Tim. I don't believe we have ever been alone. I think we experienced some kind of panspermia. There are the 5 fingers of man. We had ancient civilizations with massive populations that are now gone. The Atlantean continent, the Lemurian continent. Our relationship with ETs goes back to the very dawn of our creation, and in my way of believing. And I'm a great follower of the late Dr. Zecharia Sitchin, and he was one of the foremost translators of ancient Sumerian, which tells us everything we need to know about our origins. We are, in fact, and in fact, even the wonderful Michael Tellinger, one of his recent books is called Slave Species of the Gods. Well, that's kind of what went on. If you accept the idea of the Sumerian cylinder scrolls and that this is a history, we were genetically upgraded from, according to the information, a type of hominid. They could have been Denisovans or some type of Neanderthal. We're not really sure. Many of us carry Neanderthal DNA. I do, I know, but Ozzy Osbourne does. No surprise there.
No,
but,
none.
But at any rate, we were genetically spliced and created. And this took a very long time. So I envision it was almost like a kind of a Dr. Moreau sort of thing. I think they experimented with animals. I think and apparently, they were successful with creating what we now know as the Homo sapiens sapien, but these beings were unable to reproduce on their own amongst themselves until Anunnaki genetic material was added in. And that, my friend, is original sin. Mm-hmm. It is not the serpent. The serpent is the symbol of Enki because it's a medical, it has to do with the caduceus. It's a medical symbol. It's a symbol for Enki, creating, Adam and Eve, but they weren't satisfied and they wanted to be immortal like their progenitors. Mm-hmm. So this is part of the, the Bible gives us like about that much, and the Holy Quran has more, but it's still the cliff's notes of what really happened. Now, in fact, the Anunnaki, if we are to believe all of this material, eventually were involved in so much infighting amongst themselves that they engaged what they called the weapons of death that had been outlawed on their planet. And we're talking about nukes. And that's why we find vitrified sand in the Middle East, sand that's been turned to glass. There are only a couple things that can do that. And one of the most likely things. And I think there are also high radium, high readings with Geiger counters all over the whole area. I think it's been speculated for a long time, even in the Bible, that Sodom and Gomorrah, that was some type of nuke. It's all related. Mm-hmm. So I think after they really effed everything up here with the nukes, I think they developed a more hands-off philosophy. And so the Anunnaki, as I understand it, are by genetics, they are also Lyrans, so they would be related to Pleiadians. So they were very tall and very blonde, and they were what they called blue bloods, because I don't think that their blood operated on the metallic basis of iron. I think it was copper based or something like that. So there's a wealth of information, and anyone who's really particularly interested, instead of digging your way through Sitchin's really tough books like The 12th Planet, they're very detailed and it's not the swiftest reading. Mm-hmm. I would recommend The Lost Book of Enki, Enki, also by Sitchin, but I think that tells the complete story in a first-hand way that is, you'll never be the same after you read that. You'll never think about things quite the same way after you read that book, I guess. I got carried away, Tim. What was your original question?
Well, essentially, it's sitting in the chair. You have this person in front of you, and you've taken them down to this state where you're starting to get information from them.
Right.
What is it? We'll kind of start this again. So the question initially was, are they drawing it to them? Are you finding that you'd mentioned that most people have their first experience as children. Mm-hmm. So my question basically is, are we drawing it to us, or are they randomly finding us?
I don't think there's anything random about it. I think the people that are experiencers have often, their families have been tracked for millennia. And what I think all of this means is that from what I've heard, most of the evolved species that we engage with that even look like us are telepathic. Yes, they can talk, but they don't need to, because the speed of thought is faster than the speed of light. It's the fastest thing we know. It's also a method for astral projecting, but that's another story. But I think that the beings that engage with us for the purpose of uplifting mankind, the kind of things that are going on now primarily, simply prefer to work with individuals who have psychic ability and who can communicate telepathically. Like there's an example that I often use, say you're Jane Goodall and you're out there in the middle of the Congo and you discover some type of hominid that has never been seen before by anyone. And maybe a small percentage, maybe 5% of those hominids have developed a kind of humanoid larynx and can actually form words and speak. Now, wouldn't you put most of your focus on those beings that have already made that leap?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's kind of like that because the people that I work with are invariably psychic. I don't believe there is such a thing as an experiencer who does not have psychic abilities. I really don't. Now, sometimes I have to ask a lot of questions, particularly if I'm dealing with someone who is maybe not, what's the word? What is a kind word that I can use? Someone who has not maybe been as introspective, or has a limited understanding of their environment for some reason.
Okay.
Sometimes those people are even blessed with psychic ability, and usually before they ever leave my office, they will always tell me, well, my mother had an experience like this, but she didn't like to talk about it. She was old school religious. She thought it was like demonic. This is part of the problem we have with Christianity and other established religions, that many encounters have been interpreted through the horrible, cloudy lens of organized religion. I like that phrase.
Well, let me ask you this then. So you're saying that it seems like I take it you mean that the targets, the new targets are psychic, the original targets. Are you finding that there are some additional targets that may be children of original contactees?
I think all contactees, even those that were involved with the genetic thing, and maybe even more so, because the Zeta Reticulites wanted a certain kind of DNA. And I have heard heart-rending stories about, experiencers who are on board a craft and they're brought their children. And, these beings look, like some, hybrid version. Maybe they can live on the ship. Maybe they can't. I don't know. They don't often speak. But imagine that they're seeking a specific type of DNA. Tim, and this is going to sound a little far out, but on your show, I think that's okay.
Yeah, it's just
we can
fine.
Go a little far out.
Yeah.
We can go far out.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to think that reincarnation in a sense is tied in here, because I believe that many, many of the people like yourself and myself and other people who are doing this kind of work in spreading the word and making people feel safe and questioning the status quo. I think that that we made a decision to be here in this physical time, here in the third density, to be able to kickstart disclosure and our nice blue planet's eventual acceptance into, benevolent, rarefied life and exchanges of ideas with all sorts of beings. I think we're here for a reason. And when we talk about past life regression or interlife regression, we know that individuals who pass out of this physical life and go to the next vibrational level and are considering coming back into the third density always go before a council. And I don't mean a council that reprimands or, why did you do that? Nothing like that. The council is designed to help you decide the best circumstances to come in and whether or not to come in. And before I ever worked with experiencers and I was doing past life regressions and interlife regressions, I would ask people, well, what did the beings on your council, what did they look like? Can you describe them to me? And I started getting descriptions of beings with big elongated skulls, beings that were blue. So apparently our heaven, if you will, is easily accessed by higher vibrational beings. beings who maybe don't have to travel in their physical dense bodies. Or maybe we could all, if we wanted to, if we were evolved enough or even believed that we could visit those realms. Maybe, maybe this idea of physical death is, well, it's not an idea, it's a fact, but it's a fact in the third density. It's not a fact as we begin moving up vibrationally. The body becomes less dense, less important. I mean, this is the kind of information that I have been receiving. So I think that people are not, I don't think there are any accidents, Tim, in answer to your question, whether the Zeta Reticulites were looking for psychic smart people or just psychic people, they grabbed them. They weren't grabbing just anybody. And now we don't have so much, I wouldn't call what happens now abductions. I call them, experiences or encounters. But this abduction aspect is very negative and just doesn't apply a whole lot to what I'm seeing.
Well, we're not connecting a few dots here, Lesley. So let me try to connect a few dots here. So you're saying that some of these beings can appear within certain life councils in other dimensions, okay, or in a heaven dimension. If that's the case, and if back in the Truman era, they couldn't reproduce in a three-dimensional space, and if they're approaching people with psychic abilities who can transverse into that heaven space, that to me would mean that they're looking to find somebody in a three-dimensional space that can access that portal, correct? Which would mean a psychic.
I haven't heard about too many Zeta Reticulites or any sitting on the councils.
Okay.
So I believe that they are third density beings just like we are.
Okay.
They're ahead scientifically, but they're frail. The same things can kill them. They're not usually involved in any of the kind of highly spiritual experiences that people are having.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say it doesn't happen because there are many types of grays. We have to remember that. But the Zeta Reticulates that we've been in bed with for so long are not any more evolved than we are, except that they are telepathic. They don't speak with words. They can, but they don't.
So what business do the Greys have with abducting people? Is that who's mainly visiting people these days? Are the Greys?
No, the Greys are not. The Greys are not the main visitors right now, but they certainly were through the 80s because their genetic program was still on and still allowed by our government or our world government or whatever the hell is going on. Not sure, but when we're talking about contemporary experiences, well, let me tell you what MUFON has found. The people that, like me, do this work.
Okay.
So for the past 10 years, they assayed all of this information, and they found that 10% of the experiencers had blissful, wonderful, spiritual experiences with beings that were, light beings, or they looked like us, nothing frightening, just warm love, groovy. So, and an additional 10% had terrible experiences. And this isn't necessarily about anal probes. I mean, it could have been just fear. I'm not talking about pain necessarily, but negative experiences that scared them. My feeling is many of those experiences happened at the hands of the Black Ops. That whenever you put humans involved, everything gets screwed up.
Okay. Whenever
you put humans involved, the motivations are impure. And you got problems. So there's 10% with these rarefied experiences, 10% with the traumatic experiences, and in the middle, the other 80% is just benign, not bad, not good, not thrilling, not scary, just benign. So that's what was discovered. Now, I also was a member of the Free Experiencers, Dr. Edgar Mitchell's organization, they had a similar research program, which Kathy Martin was also involved with, and another great guy named Ray Hernandez. And they found exactly the same thing with some crossover. I did work for both, but not everybody did. So they found the same kind of thing going on. Most of the experiences that people have are benign.
Okay.
Most. And I will stand by that, because in my whole history of doing this work, I have only worked with a handful of people who have had those types of traumatic or painful DNA material grabbing types of experiences.
I do, and I may refer this person to you, I do know of someone who's having particularly frightening experiences, even down to an implant. Who exactly is still leaving implants as far as alien races?
I don't think the aliens are doing it at all. I think it's our hardware.
Yeah.
I don't think at this point that ETs have anything to do with implants. If they, now what I've asked a million questions about this because I find it fascinating, and what I have heard back from many people is, if implants are used by a benevolent species, they're kind of like step-up transformers.
Okay. They
are designed to help us achieve higher states of vibration, in a benign and non-threatening or upsetting way. So, and when they're done with their job, they just dissolve. Now, the people that say that implants are tracking devices, I just have to laugh at that, and I'll tell you why. It's because and you know this, Tim, every individual, every soul, every human body on this earth has an individual brainwave signature that is just like a radio station. Yeah. If someone wants to find you, if these beings, they all have this technology, if they want to find you, they're going to find you. There's no tracking dot. That's ridiculous. That's not what any of these things are for. Now, I can't say the same thing about stuff that the secret space program did. They may have used implants for entirely different reasons. That information is not as accessible because generally there's not a lot of talk or interaction between the experiencers and their hosts. If it's a negative experience, they don't get much information out of them, generally speaking. Okay. It's just we're doing this business. It's like we're cattle. We're just going to brand the cow. It's like that kind of. Okay.
Have you in your practice come across any clients that have come to you and said, "I know for a fact that I am an alien human hybrid, that I am the child of one of these experiments, and I want to know where I came in, or how I was born, or how this whole thing happened, and I want you to regress me and find out."
Well, I have heard that. I think sometimes when I do hear that, it is a bit of a signpost for perhaps a delusional personality. It's something, if I heard that, I would raise my eyebrow like that. Yeah. What I think is happening is, I think there has been tinkering done, especially within these government programs. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Randy Kramer. He's a real good friend of mine. He's probably one of the most vocal 20 and back secret space program guys. There's him, there's Corey Good, whose credibility is not really happening with me. And there are a few other guys that are very credible. There's Bashiago, who's out there in Washington. There's a lot of great people. So Randy Kramer believes that because his father was in the military, and this is often very true for people who got mixed up in this secret space program, they are from military families, and we don't always know if the parents were complicit or not. Okay. It's kind of a question mark, but at any rate, Randy thinks his father was complicit, and the mother they altered the fertilized egg in some way to give him superior physical abilities. And, you know, Randy is like 6'4", and I think in his family that's an anomaly. And the thing that he did is he really was a soldier. That's what he did. You know, everything is so fractalized. There are so many different kinds of jobs that people are doing. It's all, you know, it's a big mosaic, but for his purposes, but the purpose they had for him is he was a pilot and a soldier. And I wish you would come out with his book already. I read a preview copy, and that was a couple of years ago. But he did tell me that he had been enhanced and that other people had been enhanced. And certainly when he told me about some of the physical exploits that they went through, it's not something that my little Irish relatives could do. They were their best out on the moors with a shillelagh. I mean, I'm the size of Yoda. At best, on a good day, I'm 5 feet tall. You know, so it's not, my family wouldn't naturally be anybody that they would want in soldiering. But so I think there have been interventions. I do. And it is, which brings me to kind of an interesting point. I just touched on it, that you would be surprised at how many individuals are experiencers whose family were in the military, some branch of the military, especially those bases along the DEW line, which is kind of a Canadian expression, but Canada and the U.S., I know there's some in Minnesota. Canada and the U.S. built a number of cooperative bases so that they could see Russia and be able to see if there were any nukes being lobbed over the over the Arctic cap. Yep. So, you know, that's what's doing. So it's very common. There was a little girl that I worked with, and they were making a film about her, somebody at Gaia, and they paid to have her implant removed. And it was certainly anomalous. It had some human material attached to it, but essentially it was made out of a metal that they couldn't identify. So, you know, there's been quite a bit of involvement and focus on the children of military people, from what I can tell.
Very interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, if you had, let me rephrase the question. Have you ever been sitting with a client and said to yourself, I really do believe this person may be an alien human hybrid? Mm-hmm. Not just volunteered, but the information has come forward in a reading, or I shouldn't say in a reading, but in a regression.
There are several people I could say that about. That I have worked with. Yeah, there are several. In fact, my recent book, which is called Intersection, A True Story of Extraterrestrial Contact, it's about my work with one specific experiencer who I believe does have mixed DNA. And if you were to see this person, that thought might occur to you as well. There's just something about him, and he's abnormally slender and abnormally tall. There's something almost non-human looking about him in a way. You know, I mean, it's not that he would be anybody that wouldn't be a good-looking person. That's not what I mean. It's I'm having trouble describing this, but that person, I do believe, has DNA from the planet where they lived in their last incarnation.
Interesting.
And that person still engages with the beings, with a number of beings from that planet, from that just before this life, and also, I would have to say there's such a strong emotional tie that this person, I think, longs to be back on that planet. I think they feel more a part of that environment from the recent past life than they do here. I think they were more comfortable there than here. And, you know, I run into that more often than you would think. I think it's very probable that there are hybrid beings all over the world.
Mhm.
And, we could be sitting next to someone on the subway. I think they're everywhere, and I think some of them don't know it, and I think some of them do know it. So but again,
what in
we're
your
hybrids anyway. We're hybrids. We are the hybrids.
Yeah, especially with different cultures crossing in different different cultures. I don't have a better way of putting that, but as we cross cultures with breeding, we become hybrids.
Absolutely.
What do you think it takes to wake up that alien human hybrid within someone? As you said, some people may not know that they are. What do you think it takes to jog that muscle memory, so to speak, to get somebody to realize that, hey, I may not be 100% Homo sapien?
I think that comes to them when it's supposed to, like a scab falling off when your scraped knee is healed. I don't know if there is any formula for that, which will suddenly tweak someone to remember who they are. But certainly they would be drawn, these people who begin to question, and usually they're drawn to find someone like myself who can help them explore. And that seems to be the initial. Usually, there's a feeling, like I said, there's a feeling of longing. Like if they say to me, I feel like I just don't belong here, really. And it's hard for me to be here. And I have dreams about this other place that has two suns in the sky. So when I hear stuff like that, I say, wow, it's a very good chance that that you are carrying some hybrid DNA, or that you simply have come into this human body directly after an incarnation on another planet with a closely related human body. Like I don't know if anything gets too far out as far as incarnation for us. I know that there are a wide variety of beings, but I think in our soul group, if you will, I think in our corner of the galaxy, in our soul group, we primarily incarnate into bodies that are quite similar to our own.
Okay. So when ETs are communicating with these people, or when they go to do the actual communicating with people to begin with, how exactly do they do it? When there's I don't want to say an abduction taking place, but when they go to communicate with somebody in their home, let's say the majority of the people that you see, how do they go about doing it? Because a lot of people lose memory of how it actually happens. A lot of times you just hear, well, I just remember, seeing a bright light and then there was nothing. When you're going through and you're pulling these memories from people, what is it you're seeing? What's the most common thing you see from people that happens to people who go through alien abduction?
Well, they always seem to have a sense that something is going to happen. Like maybe the hair stands up on their arms, or they get a feeling of increased static energy, static electricity. It feels kind of like that, is how I've heard it described. Now, there are beings that can open portals, open vortices, and travel anywhere they wish to physically.
Okay.
And so there is an element of that. Sometimes it looks like a seam, and sometimes a portal just opens up, often in a closet or in a wall, and the being can just walk through. Now, generally speaking, benevolent beings are pretty luminous or seem luminous, usually in this altered state, and also project an atmosphere of love. And so the room can get very warm when one of these encounters is happening. So I think it's just the speeding up of molecules, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. So, and if someone is going to be taken somewhere, in other words, say say, for instance, someone has been asleep and they've been awoken by this feeling, and they wake up and they sit up, and a benevolent ET comes through the door, opens the vortice, and they come in. When kids are little, when they're little people, usually there's some flying out of the window or the door or the ceiling. And also a lot of times there are grays involved with that part. In other words, there are all kinds of grays, and some of them I don't think are even fully biological. I think they've been engineered for space travel. And Nordics and tall whites collaborate with them all the time. In fact, there's a big chunk about that in Travis Walton's story, because, he was being manipulated around and put here and there by little grays, but the people in charge were just like us.
Okay.
So there's that aspect of it. And the grays, so a benevolent being may come in and greet and say, we're going to go here, we're going to go there. And then the being will be levitated up and out and right onto the craft. Now, when people get a little bit older, 12, 13, they will simply walk out the back door with the ET who has come for them, a benevolent ET. And they often then remember either walking up into the craft, or many of them describe being beamed up, literally. It's a technology that apparently, it was existing when Travis Walton had his experience, but they're beamed up into a central area in the craft. And then children often, and young adults are often taken to classes, where they're learning to do various interesting things that all seem to be designed to stimulate, psychokinesis, moving objects, whatever it is, they're doing it and they're learning it. However, the ETs can fool around with linear time. They do it all. They can fool around with time. They do it always. So, a little kid can be, in theory, out playing and having class all night and then be returned to their bed, and it will only be, 5 minutes later by our linear time. So they fool about with time. So it's very hard for an abductee to often tell me when things happened.
Do any of these abductees tell you about the lessons and what exactly they learned, like such as psychokinesis or any of the things that they're taught upon the ship?
They get real descriptive about it. They'll tell me that they're looking at these holographic screens and they're moving shapes around. I have heard all kinds of stuff, and it all sounds like 4-level Dr. Spock chess to me. It all sounds like, it always sounds like, Mr. Spock, not Dr. Spock. Yeah. But it sounds like brain exercises that, most of us wouldn't be able to do, but the kids don't seem to give a thought. They just, kids are, if you're afraid of doing something, you're not going to be able to do it. Right. So these kids just kind of know they can do it, and they go in and they do it. And so I've heard about, the holographic shapes being put together. Oh gosh, almost every kind of game or levitation. They did something with balls where they were levitating them. So it's all kinds of stuff like that. And all for the development. And you might see in those classes little people who are hybrids, obviously hybrids. Yeah. So there are some little people that live on on ships.
Huh. Was it ever mentioned by any of them that staying on the ship or staying with those aliens was an option?
For some reason, it's not an option at this time for the ones that have asked to stay, because they feel it's more home than their own home or whatever. And I don't know exactly why that is. Maybe it's something that isn't allowed at this point in our relationship with the ETs. Maybe it seems like it would be, removing them from their parents would be something that those beings would not do. Very difficult to say, but it doesn't seem to happen. and or at least, the people I'm not talking to, obviously they came back. So
Right.
why couldn't there be, there are so many missing people and missing children. Maybe that is an option where in some circumstances these souls are offered the opportunity to go off planet. I don't know.
So if the Greys were mainly the 80s and were the ones that were taking humans in the 80s, who are taking people now?
Well, again, I'm not so much sure that we should be using the word taking, but I believe that the only negative experiences that are going on right now are collaborations between still the Zeta Reticulites and our secret military operations.
Okay.
I think the worst things that I have heard people report to me are happening in these combined programs where humans are involved.
Okay.
That's just what I'm hearing.
No. If that's what you're hearing, that's what you're hearing. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk, before we leave people today, let's talk a little bit about past lives and doing past life regression, because that's something that intrigues me a little bit. First thing I want to ask you, Lesley, is how do you know the difference between, because obviously everybody and their mother would like to be Cleopatra in a past life, or Mark Antony, or would like to be somebody of great power. They want to be Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, or they want to be someone who, obviously someone of note. But you never see anybody say, well, I wanted to be the janitor in the Pyramid of Giza.
Yeah, right.
There's never been that person. How do you know for certain that what you're looking at in a past life regression really is a genuine past life regression?
Well, I think, first of all, I have never come across anyone, nor has my mentor, Dr. Georgina Cannon. I've never come across anyone who claimed to be a famous person.
Oh, okay.
It has never happened to me. Although in some situations, people have reported historical things where they've been in an area, but they're not a star of it. They're not a celebrity. They just happen to be there. So that's self-aggrandizing. I can't even say that word. That ego-based thinking that you're like Napoleon or or whatever. If I heard that come out of someone's mouth where I think I'm Napoleon, then I would be highly suspicious. I had someone not too long ago who believes they were Elvis.
Okay.
Yeah, the numbers, the timeline doesn't quite work out, but they believe that. So I would steer away from that if anybody had that kind of preconceived idea, But what I will tell you about regression of all kinds and past life regression, we live in the era of the real-time mapping of the brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is new science. It's never happened before, at least not in our concept of humanity. But there have been a number of experiments where they have wired up people's brains, and then they've had people like me come in and induct this person into a regression process. And what they found was that the areas of the brain that are lighting up are not what we would call the imagination centers of the brain. It's not frontal lobe activity. It's deep in the amygdala where our deep memories are.
Oh, okay.
So on enough cases to make this a probability, I really do believe that most of the time people are experiencing actual soul memories that we do carry with us and that can be accessed when we approach it in the right way.
Do you believe, now you brought up the example of somebody thinking they were Elvis. Do you subscribe to the theory that you could have a splintered soul, that maybe a few people could be carrying just a splinter of someone, say Elvis, and maybe Elvis did die in 1977, but someone may be carrying just a splinter of his soul on to this day?
So I guess, can the soul be fractured?
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh boy, I know that the government tried very hard to do it synthetically during the super soldier program. Again, one of my clients, his name is Carl Dorey, fascinating guy. You'd love to have him on the show probably, but he related to me a torturous process when he was about 8 years old that happened to himself and a number of the other kids that was in the program, where actually through torture, they fractured his consciousness. Now I'm going to say consciousness. I don't know if a soul can be fractured. So the purpose of this awful process was that the government thought that if they fractured a person's personality, they could have a part of it that they could control.
Okay.
So ultimately, the goal was that these individuals who experienced this awful process would be able to allow that half of their consciousness to basically astral project and operate as a free being. And apparently they use this process, our government did at least, to wipe out, various political people and this, that, and the other. And what was happening, it was a type of astral projection, but the consciousness had been fractured in the same way that happens in schizophrenia, in a sense. So I know of that use. But again, I'm going to call that a fracture of consciousness rather than a fracture of the soul.
Yeah.
I'm just, that is such an interesting question, Tim. I don't know if it's possible to fracture the soul, but I believe it is possible to fracture consciousness.
That's interesting indeed. It seems dangerous though from a mental health perspective too.
They abandoned the whole thing was abandoned. It was a disaster because not only did they end up with a being, a kind of a false being that they couldn't control, but they had rendered their soldier inoperative. Really.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a completely disastrous idea. And they were doing stuff like that, Tim, up in Montreal. They were just busted because at the University of Montreal, they were conducting all of these terrible experiments with LSD and this, that, and the other designed to fracture the personality. And it was part of those experiments. Oh God, what are they called? Oh, Tim, help me. They're different. It was Project something and well known. You've heard this a million times, and they were operating in different military bases and different universities and getting young people and conducting horrific experiments.
Oh, it wasn't Blue Book. I know that.
What? It wasn't Blue Book.
No,
nothing like that happened there. No.
I know that.
Wasn't that? No. I'll think of it, but I have Jazzheimers. My brain's not working.
Jazzheimers.
Yeah, got a little Jazzheimers.
Little Jazzheimers going. So tell me this much, Lesley. What is it we need to learn from looking at our past lives? Why is it integral to who we are now? Because it seems like we get a lot of people who use the philosophy of, live in the now, be in the now, live in this moment because we learn from our immediate past and bring it into our future.
But do we?
Yeah, that's true.
How often do we repeat the same mistakes over and over again, even just in a single life? Marry the same person in theory over and over again. These things happen. I just think it is when you're ready to have an insight, when you want to make changes about why you do things, when you want to understand why you're so socially afraid, when you want to understand why you're not having you can't trust. There are things that we can't always correlate with our childhoods. There are patterns of behavior that exist for no environmental reason or genetic reason. And it's when someone is involved in dealing with those kinds of behaviors that they're frustrated with and they can't seem to move past, that a regression, a past life regression, is a marvelous healing idea. And at that point, I don't even care whether it's a real memory or not, because the person is going to be healed of that pattern if they can see it, if they can see why they do what they do or why they experience pain or fear, and it has no logical connection to their linear history. So I think it's incredibly insightful. Just real quick, I had a patient. She was a lovely lady, senior lady, and she suffered from, I would have to call it, untreatable fibromyalgia.
Okay.
This woman was sent to me because I work in pain management. And we tried everything. I used all my bag of tricks that I could think of, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. And since she was Southeast Asian, I risked suggesting a past life regression. I said, well, maybe this pain is related to something that we can't figure out here. Maybe we could take a look in the past. And she was very keen. And we did that. And what I heard was absolutely astonishing. So she, in one of her lives that she recalled, she was in India, and she was, what they call an untouchable, a servant that was just so down low that you don't even look at them. And so that was her life. And she described being this kind of a servant. And, there was a lot of detail. She described the home to me, how white, what it looked like, the family. All the detail was there. And she explained that her job was to go out from the break of dawn all day and to pump water for the castle, to physically pump it. So we're talking a long time ago here.
Yeah.
And she did this horrible, horrible labor, and she literally was worked to death. Her little body was worked to death. And she remembered passing out of that lifetime, and she was on some little pallet out in a hut somewhere, and there was a guard of some sort standing out the door, just waiting to notify whoever that she had died. And she was completely alone, had no loved ones, no family. So it was an absolutely horrible life, but a life that was defined by pain all over the body. So when she recalled that life, when I guided her through it, and she did forgiveness, and because this is a healing, it's not an entertainment. I mean, it's a real healing process. And when we got finished with that, that woman, God bless her, she had such a reduction in pain. It was a kind of a miracle. They felt it was a miracle. It wasn't a miracle because her soul memory was holding that pain. And things that she was a grandmother, and of course she did everything for everybody. So it was being reignited on some level. This servant, how unjust it was, and how she had worked herself to death, and she was on the verge of working herself to death in this physical life, really, with that pain. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. And I have so many stories like that. I mean, it's just, past life regression is endlessly fascinating. And as I said, when I'm healing, when I'm doing this work, I really don't care whose Akashic records these people are tapping into. What happens is they hear what they need to hear, and healing occurs, because it's a blessed process. It's a sacred process.
Have you, Lesley, have you ever seen anything truly horrifying in someone's past life? Like they were a serial killer, or they were something horrific?
Kind of the worst thing that I saw, there was a guy who was a gangland gangster in Chicago in the 1920s.
Really?
And he was running, like a whorehouse. He was a pimp. He was a drug dealer. He was a violent man. He shot people. It was Chicago of the Tommy gun era.
Yeah.
And then I have also, there have been people who were soldiers, who were like professional soldiers in different times. There was a guy that was a Roman soldier, and they just don't think. They just kill. Right.
So,
but there's always a price for that. Even the professional soldier has deep regrets and horrible feelings of guilt in when you get to your soul identity, when you get to your soul self and you can look back. But, even in our time, right, Tim, there are, soldiers, just because people have been able to go out and kill for a period of time, it has consequences. My friends that went to Vietnam, I'm old enough for that, God help me, we're never the same.
Yeah. Well, my grandfather served 2 tours in World War II, and his second tour, and the reason he went back a second time is because his brother was still in the Navy. He was injured in Italy and got a Purple Heart, came home, and then he was determined to go right back in because his brother was still over in the Asian theater. So he was bound and determined to go back and be there with his brother. So he went over to Corregidor in the Philippines, and fought in that Asian theater and was fighting the Japanese. And I remember when I was in high school, and he built a Japanese waterfall with 4 tiers and Japanese flowers in them. And in Minnesota, as you know, you can only enjoy that about 3 months out of the year.
I know. The rest is rough sledding.
It is. It's all snow and sledding. But I was curious as to why he was doing that. And so I asked him, because he didn't talk much. I mean, he talked a lot about the experience of war. It was unfortunately, it was kind of a coming of age time for him. It was the same time most kids nowadays go to college. He was going to war.
Yeah.
So I asked him why exactly he was building this Japanese waterfall. And he said, well, Timmy, just because they were my enemy doesn't mean I didn't respect them. And, in other words, just because I had to kill people doesn't mean that I didn't respect them. It doesn't mean that I didn't, I didn't hate them, It's
a wild thing it's almost incomprehensible, but well, my dad was in the Korean War, and he told me that, and he was a jazz musician, of course, so aside from being in the Army band, he went through basic training, and he said by the time he was done with basic training, he was ready to go out there and kill, so that's a kind of mind body washing experience, way what they do in basic training.
Yeah. And I know his entire life he dealt with what we now call PTSD, but and I think a lot of soldiers, if not most, do. They have some form of it.
Oh God. And those poor guys in Vietnam, because they went over there and they started using heroin and stuff there was a huge amount of drug use going on over there that was very serious, and many of those guys continued that pattern when they came home. They're like the veterans that haven't been respected, and the veterans that where everything has fallen short for them because of the unpopular war. Yeah.
And when I say thank you to a soldier, I don't mean it hollowly. I think there's a lot of people who give a hollow thank you for your service.
No,
and they don't realize how much of a toll it takes on that soldier. When I say thank you to our soldiers who have served our country, I don't mean it with a hollow ring. There's no hollow ring behind it, because I come from a family that has served this country, and many members of my family have served this country, and I realize the sacrifices that are told upon our soldiers. So I realize that. So
I couldn't agree more. And they have given part of their soul.
Yeah.
They sacrifice their innocence, a lot of times their future, not going to school, they sacrifice everything for our freedoms, which we certainly should never take lightly, because it's a huge, huge, huge sacrifice. Now, a big chunk of the work that I do is I work with first responders, who I also consider soldiers on the front line. Yep, exactly. And these are the dear people who are, in the ambulances, and the things they've seen, and they have the PTSD is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So even, the public servants who work on the front lines of our society, 99.99% of which are wonderful people, they are also experiencing horrendous PTSD. And who wouldn't? I think a lot of times, sometimes when there have been violent acts that police either didn't stop or were part of, it's simply because that person should not have been on duty, that they had seen too much, and were in the throes of PTSD, only nobody was helping them. So.
Yeah. I got to ask you this question because I do have quite a few friends who are police officers who have told me they've seen some unusual things while on duty. Yeah. And have you ever had an officer of the law come to you and say, I feel like I might have had an experience with ET?
Mm-hmm. I have, and not just one.
Have they undergone some hypnotherapy with you to try and get that experience?
And there has always been valid material coming back that supports what conscious memories they had. Sometimes they have just been in the right place at the right time to see something, but it's usually, again, as I said, more commonly, there's a pattern of experience that we uncover.
Wow.
But yes, absolutely. And some of the very famous, whistleblowers, Lani Zamora, and those. There have been a lot of cops through the past in the 20th century who have seen incredible things.
Wow. Well, mention your book one more time here, Lesley. The book that you have out now.
The book that's out right now is called Intersections, A True Story of Extraterrestrial Contact. And what it is the story of this individual that I worked with that we discussed earlier, who believed he had incarnated recently from another planet. And he is a lifelong experiencer, one of the most interesting experiencers I have ever known, simply for the variety and the depth of the things that he's gone through. So what the book is there are a lot of literal transcriptions of the sessions themselves. So it really, hopefully, brings the reader into something that they wouldn't usually see or experience. In other words, exactly what goes on in a hypnotic regression session. So I think it would be fascinating to anybody who has an interest in this subject matter.
Most definitely.
And my next book that's coming out, I think in the fall, is a humorous biographical account of my show business life. It's different. It's called Woman on the Road.
Okay.
And then following that will be another ufology focused book, which is tentatively entitled Midwives of Disclosure.
Oh. There you go.
So I got plans.
Speaking of, two more questions before we wrap up here. One, how do you ease somebody off of the trauma of, we'll call it abduction or visitation? How do you ease somebody off that trauma? Because obviously that trauma's been there. You have to go through the regression in order to get them to live through it. But how do you get them off the anxiety of it? How do you ease them through that?
Well, I think it's really exactly like treating any other type of trauma. We disrupt the negative receptors, as it were. I think that, as I explained a little bit earlier, a lot of the time when someone can actually have a complete memory of an experience, it turns out to not even be traumatic. When they finally get all the information, when all the pieces fit. But if there is trauma, we desensitize people to the trauma. We take the experience out, we look at it, and then we release it without suppressing any memory. We can release the power of a memory because it's only a thought. Mm-hmm. And we can do it in such a way that the person can keep the memory, but not remain reactive to it.
Okay. Second question would be, obviously in the news the last year and a half, you've seen videos out there, like I mentioned about the UFO Disclosure Symposium, super fast UAP out there that our own military jets have followed. Mm-hmm. I want to get your opinion on what is now being called a soft type of disclosure by the U.S. government, and what exactly you think of some of those videos that came out.
Well, I think some of the stuff we're seeing, maybe even a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, is actually U.S. property or the result of reverse engineering from our own various programs. So we've got the parallel space programs. We got the poor guys that flew in a tuna can to the moon, and then we've got what's really happening. So I think maybe a lot of the time what we are seeing are, in fact, our own collaborative craft that we have developed or reverse engineered. But I also think that craft of evolved beings is purposefully showing itself to us because they have very sophisticated cloaking devices. They can also, manipulate what the craft looks like by thought processes. I mean, it's incredibly advanced what they can do. But I think we are being purposely shown benign craft so that we know that we're not alone, so that we have hope. Because to me, it's the opposite of frightening. It is hopeful. It is hopeful that, yes, we can get to that point too, where we're not letting madmen, blow up civilians in Kyiv. We can get to that point. We just have to have the balance improve. We have to have more loving, accepting people than hateful, violent people. And it's happening. And there are very special children coming in. And that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother show. But we have amazing children coming in who are gifted in every way and who are going to bring down elitism as we know it in this world.
There you go. Lesley Mitchell-Clarke also has a YouTube show. It's called Contact TV. We'll have a link for it in the description of this program. You want to tell people real quick about Contact TV?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it was Contact Radio for years and years. And then about 5 years ago, we went to a format like Zoom. And then a couple of years ago, we went to a studio format, which is really great, which means we can bring, wonderful guests either in to be interviewed in person, or we can use, the Zoom technology, but with a kind of jumbotron. So it really by elevating our production value, I think we've been able to have also perhaps a consistently high caliber of guests, which has been fantastic. We don't make a whole lot of shows. We do about 2 a month, but they are hopefully a quality product and.
That they are. They are. They are.
Great time doing it.
I've checked out a couple of the programs, and they are definitely better quality than a lot of programs out there. So, check out Contact TV. We'll have a link to it here in the description of the program, so you can check it out for yourself. Lesley, I want to thank you very much for being on the program today. It was a great discussion, and loved having the discussion with you and talking about some of these experiencers and the regression hypnotherapy. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you if they feel like they've had contact with ET?
Well, you can always email me. I would love to hear from you, even if you just want to share your experience or ask me a question. You can always reach me by email at Lesley, Lesley, at lightworkhypnosis.com. And it may take me a couple days, but I promise I always get back. So please do email me. You can also find me on Facebook, either as Lesley Mitchell-Clarke or as Lightwork Hypnosis. And you can message me there too.
All right. Want to remind people as we leave you today about the UFO Disclosure Symposium. It is May 27th through the 29th in Vernal, Utah. Again, there will be a link in the description of the show to click on so you can check out the different packages that are there. Dr. Travis Taylor from the Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch will be one of the special guests that will be there. Dr. Michael Boyd, Professor Avi Leb. You'll have L.A. Marzulli, among others. A distinguished panel, to say the least, that'll be there. Micah Hanks, our good friend, will be there. Andy Marshall will be there as well. There are 4 different packages that you can actually sign up for. Everything from a VIP admission ticket that will get you a tour of the Blind Frog Ranch, which is having some of the same activity that Skinwalker Ranch is having over there. General admission ticket that gets you into the conference as well there in Vernal, Utah. There's a daily admission ticket if you only want to take part in one of the days there in Vernal, Utah. And of course, if you can't quite afford a trip to Vernal, Utah, or you've got plans over Memorial Day weekend, you can get the live stream admission ticket, which allows you to stream from the comfort of your home worldwide. So no matter where you're listening to this podcast, you could be in a different country, for gosh sakes, you can sign up for the live stream ticket and you can take it all in from the comfort of your own home. This symposium, folks, is going to be newsworthy in that four videos that have never been seen by the public before, top secret videos, will be shown to the symposium, and the distinguished panel is going to review them and let you know exactly what they think of what you're seeing, and going to break it down for you point by point. By all means, don't miss this UFO Disclosure Symposium, May 27th through the 29th, Vernal, Utah. We have a link for it in the description of this program. Folks, it's a cold, cruel world out there, and I want to remind you to take care of yourself and each other. Give each other an extra hug this weekend, or spend a little time with someone that maybe needs that extra attention this weekend, and take care of each other a little bit more this weekend, as it just seems like the world is getting a little crueler. We want to bring a little extra light to everybody this weekend. Make that your goal. Just take a little extra care of each other. That's what I ask you to do. I myself have big plans this weekend. I'm going to spend a little time with Mom. That's what I'm going to do. You take care of your mom as well, if Mom is still here. If not, remember Mom this weekend, and wish her a happy Mother's Day. I wish all of your mothers a happy Mother's Day, your grandmothers, your sisters, your aunts. Don't forget about Auntie, by the way, for Mother's Day, or your godmother. A happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there as well. We'll see you next week. We got another great week planned here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.